I'm the editorial director for Credit.com. And it's actually a topic I love to talk about, content distribution, because that's what I do. I work with all of our partners, some of the big portals. I'll get more into that in a second, but we're going to introduce ourselves and talk about content distribution and how you can make it work for you. And Bob is one of our contributors, and so he can kind of give you the perspective of how it is to work with us and what he's done and how he got there and then landed at Credit.com. So who are we? Why are we here? Why are we here? It's a very existential question. Bob and I started working together, and we landed here from some different places that you might recognize. So I actually interned at the Wall Street Journal in the summer of 2008. Really interesting time to be working at the Wall Street Journal. Ooh, sorry. It was a really interesting time. I worked at the global edit desk in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and the week before I ended my job there, they laid off a third of the edit desk and moved everyone back up to New York City. And as a colleague of mine very aptly put it, we learned a lot about business journalism and the business of journalism, which, it's hard out there for any recovering journalists in the audience. It's not easy. So I started my work at the Wall Street Journal, and then I was looking for a job in New York City, and I actually landed at Main Street, which is the consumer-facing site and personal finance site owned by The Street, Jim Cramer's company, if any of you are not familiar. And that was also an interesting time. There were also some layoffs there. And you'll see this is a recurring thing for, again, recovering journalists will know this. It was an interesting time to be working in personal finance, obviously, because as you guys know, the ecosystem has changed a lot as people were hit by the recession and started recovering, and money became this huge focus. And so people really wanted to know the dollars and cents, how to get out of debt, how to recover from bankruptcy. And now we're in a really interesting place where a lot of people have recovered. Their credit was getting better, and they're interested in different topics. They're interested maybe in focusing on saving and things like that. And so it was an interesting time to be working at Main Street, and we also had some layoffs there as well. And I ended up going to Credit.com. And in my work at the Wall Street Journal, I was doing work for the newspaper. So I was editing for a legacy publication on a daily basis. I didn't work with any online. That's where I started, and it's really interesting to see the evolution because I went to Main Street and The Street, which, their revenue is ad-based, so it was all about page views. And we worked with some of the content distribution partners that I now work with at Credit.com, Yahoo and MSN, the big portals. But it was entirely page view based. So, that's where the clickbait headlines come from. No shame to clickbait headlines, but, we would do the slideshows and, try to just get as many people to come back to Main Street and just click on articles. And, there's a couple former Main Streeters here. We had a slideshow called the drunkest cities in America. It was, not exactly a personal finance highlight for us, but it was something that drove a lot of page views and a lot of people read it. And it was kind of a business model that gets a little bit tiring, right? You're focusing on trying to get a lot of page views. And so when I went to Credit.com, the model is a little bit different. We use content distribution to build SEO, and we also use it to drive traffic to our content. And we're building our brand as content experts and subject matter experts in personal finance. So we have a group of journalists that work with us. And Bob is one of those. And I'm going to have Bob talk a little bit about his experience in the world of journalism.
Hi. So good morning, everybody. How many people in the room are content creators? Everybody. Okay, great. So when you make stuff, I think that there's two things you want. You want to eat, and you want to have impact. Right? Those are the two important things I think about every day. So I worked for MSNBC.com. I was actually one of the founders of MSNBC.com in the 90s. I lived out in Seattle. And then I went from there to NBC News when we were acquired by NBC in the 90s. And I did that for about 18 years. I wrote some books, as you can see there, and I was a regular contributor at Today. I have two specialty areas. One is rip-offs finance, so that's why I'm at this conference, and the other is cybercrime. So this week has been the Super Bowl for me because Wells Fargo is the greatest rip-off finance story ever. And then yesterday's Yahoo story, $500 million accounts, 500 million accounts rather. So this has been an exciting week for me. But I'm going to talk to you about this after Callie describes a little bit more about what it means to spread content around the planet. But what I want to share with you guys today, during the course of this next hour, is when I left NBC, I had the biggest fear that all of you had, which is, will I be able to eat and will I disappear? Well, because no one ever forget in this room, we all do this. We could be making a lot more money doing other things, right? We do this because we care about our content. We care about our subject matter. We care about whether people get kicked out of their homes or are saving for retirement or are just nervous and can't live the lives they want to live. So, I want my stories to have impact, and how do I do that? So, as I explained earlier, Callie picked me up off the trash heap when I left NBC and rescued me, so that's why I'm here.
Yeah. A recovering journalist.
So explain how you picked me up off the trash heap.
Yeah, so to give you guys a little bit of background about Credit.com and how our business model kind of works and how content fits into that and how content distribution really drives a lot of our business. So you might be familiar with Credit.com. We have a free credit score, and people come and they get their free credit score every 14 days. We actually have 2 of them, and they get 2 every 14 days. And then, they might be matched up with credit cards if they decide they want to find a card that they're likely to qualify for, and then that's how we make our money, essentially. That's what feeds us, right? And then we also have a content operation that Mike Schreiber started about 5 years ago. I came on about 4.5 years ago. And what we started doing was we weren't just publishing to the blog. We started going out to all of these content syndication partners that we had worked with, and we're saying, hey, we have this great content. We have these great experts. They're writing about topics that you guys are already covering on a regular basis, and we'd love to just give you our content for free. The win for us, and you'll see it, the difference between the business operation, the editorial operation is interesting. The reason we can get our foot in the door with Yahoo and MSN and AOL and CBS and MarketWatch and all of these publications that are journalists, we're working with editors, we're not working with business development people, we're working one-on-one with fellow journalists, is because we are journalists. We're trying to do news. So we're doing evergreen pieces that are advice-driven, but we're also covering things in the news. We're doing Wells Fargo stories, and we're kind of trying to do some sense-making for consumers and helping them understand it. And we talk about things that are in the credit space, but really we talk about personal finance because we want to engage with people who are interested in what's happening with their money, because ideally then they might be interested in their credit score and they might want to know more about how to manage that. And that's kind of how our business model works. But our editorial team works entirely independently of our business operation. We don't say to a reporter of ours, you must write about this card or anything like that. And that kind of integrity is what has helped us really foster and build these relationships. And one of the things that we continue to hear from our partners is that, we go out and we try to just do the news in a really solid way. And we try to make sense for readers. Our editorial mantra is inform, don't advise, and really try to give them the information they need to make the right decisions. And that has really been something that our editors that we work with at these content partners is something that they really respect and enjoy, and that's what keeps those relationships really strong. So just to give you kind of a Credit.com in a nutshell, here's what we do on a daily basis. So we have an editorial team of about 8 journalists in-house that work out of our New York City office, and they're putting out 40-plus stories a week. We also do video, and we syndicate that content. It appears on the blog first, and then we also syndicate that content out to all of our content partners. We have about 50-plus experts and contributors, there's some of them here in the audience, who write for us, and that piece of content they give to Credit.com, it goes to Credit.com first, and they get links back to their site, and they can build SEO, and they can kind of tap into our audience and build their brand in that way. But then we have 100-plus sites that our content appears on. And so the big win is, your story gets picked up by editors at these other publications, and you publish one story, and you see it a dozen different places, potentially hundreds of different places, because we work with content networks as well. So, like I said, we don't just cover credit. Also, credit touches a lot of different topics, such as mortgages, auto loans. But we really want to engage with personal finance audiences. So we talk to a lot of different people who are just interested in money. And that's, FinCon, you guys realize how wide the range is of interest in topics. We have people here who are talking about real estate, people who are talking about life insurance. And it's a lot of different communities. But the one thing they all have in common is they're all interested in money, right? And we also really focus on personal stories. Bob can kind of talk about how personal stories are what make personal finance really interesting. The how I did it, Wells Fargo is that is just a number to a lot of people. But if you were impacted by Wells Fargo, you'd be angry. And that anger is and trying to be an advocate for consumers is really what our goal is. And trying to add that flair to stories is really what's important to us. And we also use content to engage our user base, obviously, and get new users. It's a lot easier for us. We can grow our audience only so much if we just publish at credit.com. But if we go out and we try to reach different audiences that are also interested in money content, then we can grow that user base and engage them in a different way. And it's great brand building for us. And then we have tools. I talked about the free credit score, and this is kind of our business model. We translate credit for people. That's kind of, like I said, sense making is really what our goal is. So here's kind of all of our different content contributors. We have our editorial team up top. You might recognize this handsome fellow right here, Bob Sullivan, my co-presenter. And here are some of our content partners. These are people that I'm talking with these editors on a regular basis, and it's kind of like a matchmaking role. I'm going out to them and saying, hey, what's working for you from the content you've been given? What are the things you're seeing that you're going to need in the next month? And then, what Yahoo needs is going to be different than what Fox Business needs, and what Fox Business needs is going to be very different than what MSN needs, and what Scripps needs is going to be equally different. And so it's my job to kind of, when we have someone who contributes a story to us and it posts to credit.com, it just posts to credit.com, and then I'm out there saying, hey, you need to grab this story, MSN. This is a perfect fit for you. You were saying we need more identity theft content. Here it is. I have a great piece for you. And part of that is how we keep these relationships strong, right? And they're interested in some of the diversity of opinions we have on topics. And so it's really great. A student loan story might not appeal to NBC, but it might really appeal to AOL's readership. And so you can kind of tap into all those different audiences. And there's a wide array. A lot of people ask, how many page views does a story in syndication get? And it's like millions. That digital footprint is huge. You can tap into a lot of different audiences, and then you can also tap into some smaller, more engaged audiences too that are maybe more close to your goals specifically. So this is talking about finding your audience. There's a lot of different partners. You might have noticed on there we listed a lot of the big portals like CBS and Fox and NBC and AOL, and those audiences are great, right? You can get a lot of eyeballs on a story, but they might not all be specifically interested in a money topic. And so we talk to a lot of different people. We work with a lot of news sites. We work with Scripps and Cox Media Group. They own a lot of small local TV news stations. And we work with them to get stories picked up in Columbus, Ohio, and in Austin, Texas. And those small little places where people are still getting their news, and they're full of overworked journalists who don't have time to maybe write the story about 5 ways to save money this month. That might not be their top priority. They might be focused on City Hall. And we can kind of help them by adding that content that they want and they know that their audience wants, but they don't have the time to be able to produce because a lot of journalists at these organizations are overworked and underpaid. Again, recovering journalists. And so we work with a lot of different sites. We work with those big news portals. We work with hyper-local sites. We work with newspapers that also have online publications. We work with a lot of bloggers in the personal finance communities, again, some of them in this room. And we work with TV as well. And it kind of helps you tap into, contributing something to us, and content distribution helps you tap into a number of different audiences. Convincing them you're worth. What do we look for? So, what is a good story for content distribution? It's a good question. There's a lot of different answers to that. Because like I said, we have a lot of different partners, and they all want different things. Like I said, what works for AOL might not be something that works for MSN. But the kind of universal truths, I would say, of this whole thing needs to be good copy. You need to write in a clean way that, if you write a story and it's full of curse words, for example, it might not be something that AOL or NBC might want to pick up. So you have to kind of write good copy. It needs to be engaging. And I can go into the specifics of that, but there's a million other meetings that focus on how to write engaging, interesting copy. It needs to have solid reporting. So you can write from an expert opinion or perspective if you have one, if you're a CFP and you know about a specific topic that your audience is already engaging around and you really want to write an expert post about it. You can talk from an expert opinion, or you can talk to other experts in the community. We are here at FinCon, and there's a million experts here, all on different subjects. The big thing is hitting your deadlines. We send month-ahead schedules and week-ahead schedules to our partners, and we say to them, hey, you can expect this from us on this day. And if we don't give it to them on that day, then you've lost your spot, essentially. A lot of these partners plan promotions ahead of time. And so being reliable is so incredibly key for using content distribution to make it work for you. Solid ethics. We don't do advertorial. That's a big difference. We're not native content marketing. There's a line in the sand that we draw. We have journalistic integrity. We have transparency. We always, if we're in an article, since we offer credit cards on credit.com, in an article where we're talking about credit cards and maybe we mention a credit card, we will say this credit card is offered on credit.com, and we may make money if you apply for it, but we never put product links in our articles that go out in syndication. It's always to content. It's always to reviews. It's always to expert opinions or to free tools. And that kind of integrity, again, is what we talk to these news organizations about. We're not advertorial. We're not writing something just to get someone to sign up. We're writing something to help consumers, and that's the value add that really helps us build those relationships. It needs to have a unique or interesting point of view. We're all in personal finance. How many of you have seen this same story, the headline you wrote on someone else's site? Not necessarily they stole the idea, but there's only so many ideas, right? And it's all coming up with an interesting way to say something that's already maybe been said, because some of the basics of personal finance are universal, right? And so it's coming up with an interesting way to say it. The other point that Bob and I were talking about is that, MSN and Yahoo and AOL, they have a lot of content syndication partners. So you need to stand out in some way. And having a unique perspective and selling yourself as that unique perspective is really important. So writing a story about 5 ways to get out of debt, I don't know. That story as an editor I've seen a million times. I wouldn't necessarily write it for credit.com. I would try to pick something, an interesting way, a personal story, someone who's coming from an expert perspective and can add something to the conversation. And, it's headlines. These editors are looking for clicks, right? They want to put things up that are going to drive page views for them. And it's not clickbait. It's just getting something that sticks out. A trick that I use, and feel free to steal this, I go to BuzzFeed. And I love BuzzFeed because they do A/B testing on their headlines. So they will do 2 different headlines, and they will say, all right, which one is performing better? And then they'll pick the one that's performing better, and that's the one that they'll push out. They'll test their audience a little bit. And so I love that, and I take advantage of it and use it for my own evil benefits. And I try to take interesting words from their headlines and add them to ours. Or I try to see what they're doing structure-wise for a headline. How are they writing their headline? Are they starting out with an interesting phrase? Are they ending with an interesting phrase? And trying to take their structures and on a story about, 15 totally insane photos of monkeys going crazy. I try to take that and see if I can sub out monkeys into a personal finance content idea and come up with a unique way, a unique perspective, or an interesting way to say something for the audiences to help make that story stick out to these editors at these portals and publications. The other thing is just a great story. Everyone has a great story. Money is so much about great stories, right? The how I did it's. We just did a story about an extreme couponer who used her extreme couponing to feed thousands of people, and she did it for charity. It's an interesting take, right? We've all seen the extreme couponer stories. There's shows on TLC, but she was doing it for a good cause, and it was really interesting, and it was just something that you just have to click on, right? As a reader, we all consume news. You just have to click into it and figure out what she's talking about and how she did it. And that's really what personal finance journalism for us is about. It's about giving great stories and making sense and engaging that community. And the other thing is an exclusive. If you have interesting data, if you've found something, content creators who are out there, that no one else is talking about, maybe there's like one of the great stories that we found was with the city's Costco credit card adoption. We were getting commenters on our Facebook page saying like, hey, I'm having a lot of problems with this. And so we had our journalists on our content team in New York start engaging with those people on Facebook, finding out their problems, going and getting comments from Citi, and talking about some of the issues that were going on with the Citi and Costco credit card adoption. And that kind of content is great because then I go to the partners and I say, hey, we have a real person who's having trouble with this situation, because that's hard to find for a lot of people, right? And we have a really great story, and we've done the solid reporting, and we've talked to Costco, and we've talked to Citi, and we know what's going on. And you guys we're ahead of you here. So instead of trying to chase that story, take ours. We'll give it to you. It's free. And so that's really some of the real keys of what we find makes successful pickups, and how to get your content picked up by those sites is really these are the essentials. These are the building blocks of how to make your content appeal to those partners. So giving away your content for free. There are probably some freelancers in here who are like, well, I don't like doing that. I like to get paid for what I do. So to kind of explain how Credit.com's syndication model works, so we syndicate a lot of articles, and then in those articles, we link back to core pages that are really important to us. So if you go onto your phone right now and you Google good credit score, what's a good credit score? The Credit.com article is the first story that pops up. We have the top ranking in Google. We are targeting that audience, right? And we link back to that story in a lot of our articles that we put into syndication. And by doing that, we build great SEO. And that story's success in organic traffic, and we get a lot of organic traffic out of that story, is because we continue linking back to it over and over and over again to all these different partners. So all these great high-value domains are linking back. And you might drive a little bit of traffic back to what's a good credit score from a link in a syndicated post, but the bigger traffic win is the organic growth that you're going to get for that page. So what I like to tell people who contribute content to us and people who are just interested in content distribution as a whole is you need to pick your pages that you want to rank for. Pick your stories that are really key to what you do. And I'm also happy to answer questions afterwards if anyone's like, I don't really know what's key to what I do. I don't know what those stories are. Help me. And that SEO win is huge, and that's how we get new users who they might see a story about grocery store savings and a link in there to what's a good credit score, but they were really interested in the grocery store savings. They weren't interested in the credit score. But that link in that story helps us get someone who's Googling what's a good credit score and is interested in what we have to offer. So that's kind of how our model works. And we do drive some traffic as well. Traffic is not insignificant. It obviously matters. And you can drive a lot of traffic to stories by using really active linking words. So saying like, if you have a free guide, if you have something that is a real value add for your consumers, those are the things that people click on in stories and syndication. Because I think that everyone here has gone to a website and it's like, if you're not going to get something by clicking on there, you're not going to click, right? Like if the link in an article doesn't say what it's going to do for you, if it doesn't actively tell you where you're going to go and what you're going to get out of it, it's not as useful, and that won't drive as much traffic. It might help with SEO, right? It's a good link and a good domain. But the real winner is when you can drive people with that traffic and get them to sign up or engage with you in some way. And so active linking is really important for that traffic. And then the other is obviously exposure and PR. And Bob can talk a little bit about this and his experience with that and his byline appearing on lots of different places and how that works. But it's a lot about brand building. You might notice at Credit.com, we don't have like a lot of ads on TV, right? I don't know if any of you have ever seen a Credit.com TV ad. No, that's right, because we don't do any. So this is how we build our brand. You might be familiar with Credit.com content or the bylines of the people who write for us, though, because you've seen it on MSN or AOL. And all of us are consuming consumer news on a daily basis. We're looking for other stories. We're engaging with other people's content. And I hear again and again, just the entire FinCon conference, people are like, oh, wait, I recognize you. I've seen your byline, but not on Credit.com, on like MarketWatch. And wait, were you there? And it's a brand. You're making a big digital footprint, essentially, on all these different places. And that brand building and establishing yourself as an expert is really key. So, I talked about recovering journalists, recovering journalists and how newsrooms are smaller. And like I said, they're overworked and underpaid. And they need outside content from people who are good at what they do to help supplement, because they can't do everything anymore. And websites are figuring that out at a very quick pace. And I go to partners and they say, hey, we had to fire our student loan reporter, and we don't have anyone covering student loans. So next month, can you give us like 6 stories about student loans that we can run? Because we have this campaign, and we really need to have stories that we can sell ads against for it. And we just really need good student loan content. And establishing yourself as an expert in the space that you occupy is really key for that, because there are holes in newsrooms that you can fill. And that's a really great segue, because Bob talked about his specialties, and he has a really great slide here where you can see a lot of great pictures of Bob. Some old and new.
So when people like to point to me when they talk about the crisis of journalism, I don't know why that is. Actually
Sorry, Bob.
Yeah, crisis journalism. It's one of my favorite topics. I'm just going to tell you really briefly a little bit more about how I landed at Credit.com. I'm a contributor. I'm not full-time there. I write for lots of people. I syndicate with Credit.com. I syndicate with other people. But let me just go back a little bit. 3 years ago, I had just published a book called The Plateau Effect, which is a business thought book about why most people get stuck in life, and you get stuck doing everything that you do, whether you're learning how to play piano, whether you're having a marriage, whether you're starting a business. Everything follows this pattern of beginner's luck followed by sophomore slump. Of course, this was autobiographical, right? Any good book is. So I was stuck. I had been at NBC News for about 15 years, and the book was doing well enough that I had that vague dream that we probably all have, which is, can I live an author's life and get off the rat wheel and sit in a cabin and just write? And at the same time, I was looking at the direction that big media companies were going in general, and it scared me. And anybody who's watching the election coverage this year should understand why the way that big media companies operate started to scare me. And they were less interested in the topics that I was writing about, which I cared about intensely. For about 10 years, I had written a column called The Red Tape Chronicles, where, love to hear that, where I would pick apart what I call 21st century headaches. And the way I usually explain that is whether a hacker is stealing your money or Comcast is stealing your money, you don't care. You're just frustrated dealing with red tape. So the first benefit of leaving NBC was I could write all those stories about Comcast, which is great. Don't tell anybody, off the record. But I got my jollies from, and it's just an exciting thing to do. Somebody calls me, emails me, whatever, and writes and says, hey, I have a $565 bill from Comcast for equipment that I returned, these bastards. I want to get my money back. And I could do that for people. I write their story. These stories are great. And while I have another 2 books that I'm working on, all these day-to-day stories I really, really cared about. And in the end, if I could just do what I wanted, I would be an old-fashioned newspaper columnist from the 1950s. That's the format that I really love. 800 to 1,000-word rants where I talk about justice and I have impact. Those jobs are disappearing, but that's kind of what we still do in blogs. And so my biggest fear, I was lucky, I was at NBC from the beginning, so I had a huge following there. Often had 3-4 million people read individual stories I did. And I set up my shingle at bobsullivan.net, and 100 people came. Literally 100 people, most of them with Irish last names. And what am I going to do? At the same time, I had just started talking with Callie and Michael about what it would be like to be a content partner of theirs. And the syndication thing didn't make any sense to me. I was unfamiliar with it, other than some of their stories already had appeared sort of under my nose at NBC News. And the first time someone said to me, just give us your content and we'll give it to other people for free, that blew my head, right? I'm also a photographer, and in the world of photography, there's a raging debate right now about intended pun on words, the value of exposure over money. Right? Is it worth exposure? And photographers, I think, to their credit, are really, really holding on tightly to the idea of rights. And writers, that ship has sailed. Whatever you believe about whether people should be doing things for free or not, that's the reality right now. So try to figure out how to make sense of that. And as I was having this debate with myself, I thought of Lester Holt. I'm always scared to ask questions like this now because I still have a little bit of my heart in TV news. Who here knows who Lester Holt is? Yeah, see? So you all know who Walter Cronkite is, right? Lester Holt is now NBC's. He's Brian Williams' replacement at NBC. He's the anchor and managing editor of NBC Nightly News. And there is no one, I'm biased, but there is no one more deserving to be an anchor of a TV network than Lester Holt. I've known him for 25 years, and the man covered every single story. He did yeoman's labor everywhere. He was literally popped up everywhere. And this is the piece of advice he gave me when I was very young. We were actually at covering Hurricane Katrina somewhere. And then I had to go to a company party in the middle of the hurricane coverage because it was one of those political things. So like in the middle of the post-Katrina disaster, I'm in New York, and up pops Lester. I'm like, Lester, what is this? And he said, you know, when you're trying to get somewhere, here's what you do. Be everywhere. Just show up at everything. So every company party, the small ones, the big ones, for the underlings, every news event, Lester was just there. And when you're just there all the time, eventually people come to expect you to be there. And that's a really good thing. So that's why Lester finally got his just desserts, why he got the job he did, because like at every important meeting, every important news event, eventually you say, where's Lester? So I took that line of thinking, which led me to here, because all of a sudden my impulse was, my biggest fear leaving NBC was that I would just disappear. I would vanish. The stories I care about would vanish. Again, I do this not to make money. I do this because I care about people and I want to help people. And that's, in the end, that's why we do all this stuff. And you're not going to do that if 100 people are coming to your site. So I started working with these guys. I started working with other folks. And I am now convinced that I have a bigger footprint and platform than I ever did when I was at NBC. There's still not the sex of being on television when you have a blog post that appears on 50 different places. But as you can see, here's all the different partners that I have and all the places I have and all the various hairstyles that I had. I like the black and white pictures better. But I do think that the biggest risk for any of us is that the stories that we care about that nobody reads. I mean, in the end, we're creative people, and we make things. And if you get the sense that you're making something and no one is consuming it, hearing it, listening to it, seeing it, you're just not going to do it. Conversely, nothing feels greater, and it might even, it's silly, right? We're all, like, in the end, we want to have big numbers. Of course, we want to make money. We want to succeed. But you get that one email from someone. That happens to me all the time. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution picks up a story that I do for Credit.com, and some person writes and says, oh, my God, I thought I was crazy. I thought I was the only one. Thank God you did this story. My Verizon bill has tripled over the past 2 months out of nowhere, and I didn't change any of my habits. But turns out there's all sorts of other people that are having Verizon data overages overnight, suddenly. Thank God you did this story. And you know what? I sleep really well at night when that happens. So, and the other thing I almost always get out of that is another story. And I do want to say just one thing about that, because all of us who write about money know that there's like 3 stories that we can do. Right? This is all the same advice. That's why that 4x6 index card book is such a good idea. Money advice is the same money advice. Which is true if you ever took a writing class in fiction. There's like 3 plots in all, right? There's the murder, there's the unrequited love story. We're all facing this problem. But what makes any TV sitcom interesting, what makes any movie interesting, are the characters, not the plot. So how you get out of debt, we all know the answer to that. Who is getting out of debt is what's interesting. Every single one of those stories is fascinating. Take the time to find those people, and that's what's sexy about the story. So I think in the end, your own natural human impulse to care about another person is by far the most important quality that you have as a journalist. And luckily, that's what's going to get your story picked up.
Yeah.
Right?
Like we talked about, personal stories, unique perspectives. Those are the things that those editors, those overworked editors, are trying to find, but it's hard. It's hard work. And so when you have an audience that's actively sharing those stories with you, that's a value. That's a huge value. And like Bob said, it becomes kind of a cycle. It feeds back into itself, and it's a bit of a feedback loop in a very positive way. We started doing a series Bob did for us called Debt Collector Files, where he was just writing. We just saw such incredible response to debt collector stories, specifically in the Yahoo audience, which was interesting. Some partners at the story, they would grab it and it didn't do that well. The Yahoo audience, all about debt collection. And so Bob would do a story for us once a week on something related to debt collection, anything. It was kind of, we just said, just do what you do. And that first story comes out. and then he gets 1 million comments on that Yahoo article. And I don't know if you've ever been in the Yahoo comments section. I warn you, please don't. But Bob braved it for us.
Just wear a mask or something before you start reading.
It can be rough.
Yeah.
But, that brave that comment section, the comments on the original story on credit.com. And then he also was just getting emails. We solicited it at the bottom of the story, email Bob Sullivan, bob@credit.com to, share your story and ask your question. And fostering that community meant that we had one article that turned into a weekly series that every week we would get a ton of comments on that article on a lot of different partners. And I would be able to go out to Yahoo and say, hey, this story's already doing really well for you organically, and you should promote it because there's already interest and you're already getting page views. And that is also really valuable to an editor because there's so many different, Yahoo has 1 million content syndication partners. There's so many different people that are going to Yahoo and saying, here's this great content. So when you can say something's already working for you and you're just kind of like shining the light on it, that is huge. It's a huge value.
Yeah, did you notice the story is popping up on your radar? In case you're busy, let me point that out for you. I'm going to ask a question.
Yeah.
So let's say people in the room want to do this. When you approach a new content partner and you say, we're credit.com, and they say, who's credit.com? Like, how do you deal with that? Like, what advice would you give these folks if they want to try to start syndicating?
Yeah, I mean, we have a network built already, and of course, selfishly, there's other people in the space too. This is a Masterclass. I think the very first slide I didn't point this out, but it said Masterclass ? And that's because there's a lot of different masters in this space, and content syndication is grown significantly, and the space gets more and more crowded, right? Every single year, we have new sites that we're seeing and competing with us for the same amount of real estate on those big portals, right? But so there's some networks that work, that have they're existing networks already. There are a lot of people who are already doing it. The way that we kind of work with our content partners is as content contributors as well, almost like content swaps. So we say like, hey, you can write something for credit.com. We can put it out through our syndication network, and then you can also take the story from as a content partner and publish it on your own site. So you're not just creating original content just for credit.com. You can republish it as well. And that is great because you kind of get to double dip, right? You get to use it for your own blog. And you also get the opportunity to have it go out to all these different sites. So that's really what we work with now. And then we also just, if you have a great area of expertise that we don't already have and you have a unique perspective, come talk to me. Because, I would like to say that we have everything covered, but there's always, we learn that there's new areas that are different and interesting. And we work with, partners that are those big portals, right? But we work with very specific publications like Realtor.com and Move. And we have a mortgage loan officer who is every single week, the story he writes for us is featured on Move and on Realtor.com, and that has built such a brand for himself, and he's done that content funnel the right way. He's targeted those links that he's put in those articles in such a way that he doesn't do like lead gen. He doesn't pay anymore. This is it. This is organically people find him when they search for. I won't say specifically who it is, but the specific county in California, a mortgage loan officer, they find him over and over and over again, and he tells us it's like. He doesn't have to do anything else. The other thing is that then you get people calling you. Bob mentioned that his stories will get picked up by credit.com, but then you'll see Bob Sullivan's reporting quoted in another story that another site that's not a content partner of ours, they will reference that story, especially if it's something that is exclusive or is something that is unique or interesting that no one else has. And so it kind of creates a feedback loop. But yeah, I would say talk to someone. I also am just happy, we're journalists, and so we're used to not being fed. So I also just like to talk about this stuff and share the expertise. And one of the things that I think makes us also unique is we're not like Huffington Post where, I don't know, are any of you Huffington Post contributors? Yeah. So like you set up an account and you put your story in, and like maybe you know an editor there that you can email and say, but otherwise you just like put it in and it goes out into the ether. And you don't really have a whole lot of context as to how that story does. You don't really know, it's not going anywhere else except Huffington Post. And that can be really frustrating because you feel like you've given them a piece of content and you don't really know what's happened. So my role is essentially going to those partners, and it's a very collaborative effort. I don't give assignments to contributors. It's super organic. They come to me and they say, hey, I have this great story. Do you want to carry it? And you can kind of work on however long, the tempo you want to work at. We have people who contribute once a month. We have people who contribute once a year. We have senators who write for us. Elizabeth Warren writes for us every once in a while on things that are really credit related, because she knows that her story will appear, but her media person knows that her story will appear on credit.com, but I can also go out to those partners and say, like, hey, I have a column written by Elizabeth Warren on Wells Fargo, and do you want it exclusively? And they're like, yes, please. So, it's, as far as getting into those networks, it's just having a conversation. And I'm also just happy, we're very free-flowing, I guess, at credit.com. We're not offended if you're like, hey, it just doesn't work for me. And there, like I said, there are other networks out there, but I think it's really just showing to me what your expertise is and some of the content that you've done and what you would want to do, essentially, kinds of stories you'd want to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think the piece that you guys fill in really well, which is just tricky, and this is the harsh lesson you learn from television, is, television you have 22 minutes, and there might be 100 TV producers fighting for 90 seconds of that 22 minutes, and in the end, you might have a great story idea, but if the executive producer is not interested in that, you're wasting your time. Mm-hmm. So what Callie does really well, and what someone else who would do this really well, is to understand exactly what it is that Yahoo wants, what MSN wants. And if you're writing content, you're not in a position to do that. So like translating, to do this really well, what you do is I have an idea, and then Callie says, well, if we just frame it a little bit more like this, or even if we just put a headline on it like this, then they'll pick it up. Mm-hmm. So, and again, that's an expertise that's really, really hard for a writer to have, but that's the seat that you sit in, and that's the benefit of working with somebody like you.
You make me sound very important, but it's not as important. I just try to translate for people, and it's really about making connections. And honestly, it begins there, and then we work with sites who compete with each other. And so when they say like, oh, this other site grabbed that Bob Sullivan piece, I should probably grab it, and I know that it's on credit.com, so I'm just going to snag it really quickly. And we've kind of created a scalable solution. We feed into a lot of our partners, and then we also have special versions of the credit.com blog that our content partners can use to grab content from us. So it makes it easy. I know a lot of questions I've been getting at FinCon are about duplicate content as well. It's kind of segues in an interesting way. A lot of people already do content swaps of some way, shape, or form. And Google did a bunch of SEO changes a couple months ago. So a lot of financial blogs got hit. I've looked at the numbers. It's like, it's not pretty. And I don't know if you've seen a decline in your SEO value for any of your pages. But that has been a big issue, is duplicate content. So the way that we're working to get around that is canonical URLs, and I can talk to you guys more. I want to touch on that because that's always the first question I feel like while I've been at FinCon out of everyone's mouth is like, well, won't I get dinged for duplicate content because I'm sharing my content with you and it's going to appear all these other places, and won't it look like all those places are just scraping content from me, and won't that reflect poorly on my site? And it's not the case, because we work with these partners to make sure they're doing canonical URLs, which tells Google like, hey, these guys are cool. We have an understanding. And it's something that's non-visual, and it's HTML, and it's on the back end. And we work with all of our contributors who also carry our content to make sure it's like a really easy WordPress plugin that you put in, and then you just paste in the article. And it works for our partners as well, because then they don't get dinged because they don't look like a content scraper as well. So it's a win-win to start using those. And they've been around for a while. Some of you are probably familiar with canonicals already. But that it's become incredibly important for content distributors. That's probably the biggest issue, I would say, this year, is as this business model has grown and as more people do content distribution, canonical URLs and duplicate content, and making sure that you're not hurting yourself in SEO is huge. Because like I said, the articles we do in syndication, the things we put out, they get page views for our partners, and we definitely get people who click back and come to credit.com or come to our contributors' links in those articles. But then the real win for those contributors is the organic traffic, and it's the same for us. The articles, we see a lot more organic traffic off of that and maintain those rankings because we're putting out those links and we're getting those good links back on a regular basis.